2004, a conference dedicated to the resettlement of Gaza was held in occupied Jerusalem, which was attended by 12 Israeli government ministers. Mr. President, members of the court, let me pause here to make a brief remark about the situation in Gaza as it relates to the advisory proceedings. The contentious proceedings instituted by South Africa against Israel under the Genocide Convention do not mean that the recent situation in Gaza should not be addressed here. Gaza is part of the OBT. It was occupied before October 7, and it is occupied today. Israel's policies and practices referred to in question A includes its policies and the practices in Gaza. The court will examine the situation in Gaza through the lens of the Genocide Convention in the case brought by South Africa. Here the court can and indeed must apply all aspects of international law to the situation in Gaza, including well before October 7. This brings me to Israel's second central policy and practice in the OBT, which is displacement. In order to establish its settlements in the OBT, Israel seizes public and private land and forcibly displaces Palestinians. It does so through home demolitions, evictions, building restrictions, and by establishing buffer or military zones. Again, the situation has only grown worse since October 7. As is well established, Israel has forcibly displaced at least 75% of the population in Gaza. This policy is promoted by Israeli leaders as a solution to their Palestinian demographic problem. Israeli Minister of Culture stated that the Palestinians, quote, can go to Ireland or to the desert. The masters in Gaza should find a solution by themselves, end quote. While all eyes may be on Gaza, the situation in the West Bank is rapidly deteriorating. At least 13 different communities in the West Bank have faced forced displacement since October 7. That has resulted in the north-south stretch of 20 kilometers east of Ramallah being cleared of nearly all Palestinians. The third Israeli practice is fragmentation. In order to implement the demographic and physical control necessary to perpetuate the occupation and establish further settlements, Israel divides and isolates Palestinians. It relegates them to fragmented enclaves, restricts their movement, and renders their daily lives all but unlivable. This is what Namibia and Belize aptly referred as strategic fragmentation. Israel has imposed a full blockade on Gaza since 2007, entirely cutting its population off from the rest of the world. October 7, Gaza had already been described by the UN Secretary General as hell on earth. Today, it is indescribable. In the West Bank, Israel has, for decades, implemented a system of draconian checkpoints, subjecting millions of Palestinians to daily indignities. Human Rights Watch has documented, quote, more than 40 kilometers of West Bank roads that authorities prohibit Palestinians from traveling on, end quote. Since October 7, Israel has implemented unprecedented lockdown on the entire civilian territory of the West Bank. It has closed much of its vast network of checkpoints, completely cutting off cities, towns, and villages from each other. The fourth practice that characterizes Israel's occupation is its discriminatory and unlawful violence. Israeli forces and Jewish Israeli settlers, often with the support of the state, use violence to crush even non-violent resistance to the occupation and to perpetuate a climate of fear and repression. Israeli violence has been part of the fabric of life for Palestinians even before the beginning of the occupation in 1967, and Gaza has always paid the highest price. In the 15 years before October 7, Israeli military campaigns killed 5,365 Palestinians in Gaza, the majority of whom were undisputedly civilians. Of course, this is shocking. The statistics pales in comparison to what we have in the past 4 months. At the same time, the court cannot ignore the ever-worsening situation in the West Bank. Since October 7, 397 Palestinians have been killed across the West Bank, and 453 have been injured. Even before October 7, 234 Palestinians were killed in 2024, which was the highest number on record. Civilian casualties are not just collateral damage in Israeli attacks. They are the main target. The use of warplanes, armed drones, attack helicopters, and missiles was once unprecedented in the West Bank. Now it is routine. Mr. President, members of the court, Israel's victims are often children. They include 5-year-old Ruqayya, who was shot in the back by Israeli forces on January 7th at a military checkpoint in the West Bank. Her body was withheld from her family by Israeli forces for 10 days. Just last week, Israeli forces also shot 16-year-old Nahil in the head, killing him as he was leaving school. Nahil was the 100th Palestinian child killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank since October 7. This brings me to the fifth practice implemented by Israel, which is its discriminatory military legal system in the OBT. This system privileges Jewish Israeli settlers while depriving Palestinians of the most basic legal protections. A pillar of this system is the practice of indefinite administrative detention of Palestinians without charges. As we detailed in our written statement, this practice was widespread before October 7. Its use has increased excessively since then, in what some rights groups have characterized as mass enforced disappearances. In the past 4 months alone, thousands of Palestinians have been placed in administrative detentions. In Gaza, they are rounded up, blindfolded, disrobed, humiliated, and detained in mass makeshift outdoor prisons. You can find detailed reporting at tabs 5 and 6 of your folders. In the interest of time, I will not detail the 3 remaining policies and the practices that characterize Israel's occupation, which are discussed in Chapter 2 of Qatar's written statement. These practices are 6: the eradication and suppression of all manifestations of Palestinians' culture and religion in the OBT. 7th, the economic oppression of Palestinians and the exploitations of the OBT's natural resources. And 8, the systematic persecution and suppression of all those who attempt to document or pursue accountability for the occupation, such as human rights organizations and journalists. This includes Al Jazeera, Shireen Abu Akleh, who was murdered by Israeli forces on May 11, 2022. Mr. President, members of the court, these 8 discriminatory practices and policies are among those that the court is called upon to assess in answering question A. Viewed jointly, they reveal the true nature of the occupation as an illegal settler colonial regime. I will turn now to the final portion of Qatar's presentations concerning the legal status of the occupation and the response to question B. Mr. President, member of the court, the written statements and comments that addressed in question B overwhelmingly endorsed a finding by the court that the Israeli occupation of the OBT is illegal. This was the express conclusion of at least 38 participants in these proceedings, with at most 2 states reaching the opposite conclusion. Those participants finding that the occupation is illegal offered a number of lines of analysis to support their shared conclusion. This is unsurprising. Israel's occupations has violated so many fundamental principles of international law that it would be hard to point to just one reason for its illegality. In Chapter 3 of Qatar's written comments, we identified 5 main reasons as to why Israel's occupations of the OPT is illegal. With its written comments, Qatar also submitted a detailed appendix compiling relevant statements by participating states and organizations. These can be found at tabs 7 to 15 of your folders. We hope that Qatar's analysis will be helpful for the court's work. I shall briefly walk the court through 5 reasons for the illegality of the occupation. First, the occupation contravenes the just cause obligation to respect the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. 39 states and international organizations found that the occupation violates the right of self-determination. 28 of those participants underscored that the occupation has become illegal for this reason. Second, Israel's occupation also violates just cause prohibition of apartheid. 25 participants endorsed a finding of apartheid. Among those reaching this conclusion, 16 participants underscored that the situation of apartheid renders the occupation itself illegal. Third, Israel's occupation is illegal because it violates just cause prohibition on the use of force. This was the conclusion of 18 participants. Fourth, by virtue of its illegal annexation of portion of OPT, Israel has breached yet another just cause norm, the prohibition on the acquisition of territory through the use of force. At least 41 participants in the proceedings have pointed this out, with 31 of them underscoring that the occupation is illegal as a whole because Israel's annexation of the OPT is an integral feature of the occupation. Fifth and finally, Israel's occupation is illegal due to the fact that it's not of a temporary character, not being carried out in good faith, or not being administered in the best interest of the occupied population. 17 states reach such conclusions. Mr. President, members of the court, the state of Qatar endorses all of these arguments for the illegality of the occupation. While it's, of course, for the court to decide how best to answer the General Assembly's questions be, it is Qatar's respectful submission that the court should not limit itself to choosing only one of these grounds for illegality. Unlike contentious cases, judicial economy does not support the adoption of only the narrowest reasoning possible in these proceedings. To the contrary, in the context of an advisory opinion, the court's function is to provide legal advice to the organ requesting the opinion. There are multiple relevant legal regimes applicable to the situation, and the court's advice on each of these frameworks will be of immense value to the General Assembly and to the international community at large. In this connection, Qatar and many other states attach particular importance to a finding that Israel's occupation by its nature amounts to a regime of apartheid. A finding of apartheid is not just the most accurate label for what the occupation has become. It also provides a tangible but a flexible roadmap for what must come next. What ending apartheid requires is achieving a solution, achieving a situation in which all people, Israeli and Palestinians, equally enjoy their fundamental human rights and dignity. With the requisite finding of apartheid by the court, the international community, including the General Assembly, can activate similar mechanism for bringing about an end of the occupation as it did with the apartheid regime in South Africa. This is the surest path to truth, justice, and yes, reconciliation. Mr. President, members of the court, the people of the world are looking at you. We are confident that you will seize this historic opportunity to finally bring to an end a century of injustice against the Palestinian people. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the delegation of Qatar for its presentation, which brings to a close this morning's hearing. The court will meet again this afternoon at 3 p.m. to hear the United Kingdom, Slovenia, Sudan, Switzerland, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Tunisia. The sitting is adjourned.